Sunday night, and so I'm here to just check in with you and to rather direct our thoughts a little bit for the weeks ahead. So I wanted to spend a few moments this evening talking a little bit more about the characteristics of Dionysus. You're probably going to be sick and tired of hearing about Dionysus, having read, I trust, all about the cult of Dionysus in the lecture notes. But I want to try to summarize those things here again for you, so that you have them fresh in your mind as you are reading Euripides the Bacchae. But before we do that, I also wanted to just give you a little and very gentle reminder that it's time to begin rather serious work on your final projects. I know it's very difficult, but in the last week, the last half of the semester, you really need to start splitting your time between our weekly readings and responses and your final and the research that you're doing for your final project. If you've already completed most of the 10 required blog posts, remember you have to do 10, right? Not every single one of them. You might want to really try to focus very fully on the project, final project. And if you haven't, if you've been sort of slipping a little bit on the weekly blog posts, you want to try to get those in order as soon as you can so that you don't fall any further behind. At this point, in terms of the research papers, the research projects, you should have had your topic cleared with me, which most of you have, and you should have some sense, although it may still be a little inchoate, of the sources that you are going to use. Remember that the minimum number of sources for this project is 4, and you can have up to 7. So keep looking if you haven't found the thing that you want, and also consult with the research librarians and consult with me if you're having real difficulty in finding sources. Now, even though this is a multimodal project, and what that means, right, is that it's a project that is going to include several different forms. Right? It's going to have a textual form, there's going to be hopefully images, right? There's hopefully going to be sound. Even though it is multimodal, right, and that's the nature of the assignment, there's still going to be an emphasis on the text. So if you were to say to me, what is the most important aspect of this project, I'm still going to tell you it's the text, right? It's your writing. It's how you compose, right, in text, this work and this world that you are illuminating. And then, right, how else do you use visual aids and audio texts and everything like this to make that text come alive? Okay, now the program that you use, whether it's PowerPoint or whether it's Word with links to things or whether it's Prezi or whether it's a WordPress document, that's up to you. I don't care what format you use. The organization of the project is also up to you. Right? That will be determined in large part by the way you arrange your materials, how you see that work in that world. But all projects really have to have those 8 elements. And we'll go over them one more time in case there might be any confusion. So the first thing that you want to have is a thoughtful thesis about the work or the world or the project, about that work and world that you are composing. Why are you embarking on this work? Right? What drew you to this? And what are you hoping to gain? What are you hoping to reveal through creating this project? The second element is a thoughtful list of questions that the work raises. Right? What kinds of questions does the work raise about the nature of the human condition, about perhaps the problem of identity, the relationship between self and other, the relationship between self and world, the relationship between nature and culture, all manner of questions. You must have this list of questions. Where you put it is up to you. It might follow your thesis. It might come at the very end of your project. It might be somewhere else. But be sure you have this list. You're also going to need, right, close readings of 3 passages, 3 significant passages that point to the themes or the questions that you're asking about this work, right, or that in some way elaborate your thesis on this work. How do these passages, first of all, right, when you do this, when you set this up, give me the passage, like, quote the passage, and then give me your analysis of this passage, why you have chosen it, how does it illuminate something about this work and world you want us to know. 3 of those. You also need to include one close reading of a character. There may be some exceptions to this. For example, if you're working on the pillow book, you might not really want to focus on a character, in which case I would say substitute a passage, right, for that character reading. But for most of you, you're really going to focus on one character. Gilgamesh, right? It might be Gilgamesh, it might be Enkidu. In the Old Testament, it might be Noah, right? It might be Adam, it might be Eve, Cain or Abel. We could go through, but clearly you know how to identify key figures, key characters, and offer a close reading of that character. How does that character embody the values of the world in which he or she lives? Or how does that character change from the beginning of the text until the end? And is there something in that change, right, that tells us something also about the change in the world that character lives in? Now those are major sort of textual parts of this. There's going to be one more textual part, but for now let's leave the textual and move into the visual. Every project will also have a virtual art and or archaeological museum, right, for the world. And here you're going to select 5 objects. They can be cultural objects, they can be art objects. Right? Sometimes there's going to be not a clear distinction between those 2 categories, but you want to include these in your museum. And you want to tell me something about them. Right? Think about it. If you go into a museum, you look at the artifacts, right, or the paintings or the drawings or the sculptures, and below those paintings and drawings and sculptures, there is always some information. Right? Sometimes there is a title, sometimes always, right, if possible, there is a date, and there is a description of what this thing is. So do that for me. Become a curator of a museum for a little while in this project, and create one yourself. After this, you are, or at least one of them, the other textual, the last textual part of this is also very important. And so don't kind of give up on it. I don't think you're done when you've finished your character analysis. Because the other very, very important textual component to the final project is your own personal reflection. How have you encountered the text? What is your encounter with this text and the world meant to you? How will you remember it? What do you think you'll remember about it in the future? We read things because we care about them, and we care about them because they speak to us. They seem to say something about our own situation. So try to define what that is, right, in the conclusion, the textual conclusion to your project. And then you need just 2 other elements, right? Links or embedded files that encourage your reader, your viewer, right, to explore the subject further. And finally, a bibliography of the sources that you used. Keep in mind that this project comprises 50% of your grade. That's a considerable amount. Right? It's really a considerable amount. So you want to take the project very seriously. You want to give it the time it requires. And when I think about how long this project would take, I always think between 30 and 50 hours, right, depending on how you work. Right? Everybody works a little bit differently. Please remember that I am here to help you with this project. You have but to email me and set up an appointment to talk with me, and we will talk about it and work out whatever challenges you are facing. So don't hesitate to do that. I'm always happy to talk with you. Some of you took advantage of my being in my office, being in town last week, and came to see me. And I think those meetings were immensely productive. I won't be back until December, but I am very happy to meet you on Skype or to talk with you on the phone. And please don't hesitate at all to avail yourselves of that opportunity. Okay, so for now, just for a few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about Dionysus, this figure who is so central to the Bacchae. And I hope you had a chance to look at the document that I will really be referring to in the next few minutes, which was just on Dionysus, right? A little bit of further information about Dionysus. But I think because he's so complex, right, such a complex figure in the history of Greek religion, and certainly in the course of this play, it's worth just bringing some of his characteristics to the foreground. So first of all, that supplementary document I gave you begins with quite an interesting list of the images that we have of Dionysus, where they are found, and they're found all over the place in the ancient Greek world. They're found on amphora, right? That have still with us through archaeological finds. They're found on ships. They're found in paintings. All kinds of materials exist picturing the god Dionysus. And when the god Dionysus is pictured, right, he is often pictured with the same kinds of things. He's pictured with a drinking vessel, right, because he is, after all, the god of wine. He's often pictured with an ivy wreath or vines, with the thrysis, right, which is a long kind of stick with ivy leaves and topped with a large pine cone. And I think it's not terribly hard to see what kind of a symbol this might be. He usually has long hair, right, a long beard maybe, but definitely long hair. And the images almost always show him not alone, but accompanied by his followers. Either his female followers, right, the bacchantes or the Maenads, or the satyrs, right, his male followers. Okay, so who is this god, Dionysus? If you looked at the material by Nietzsche on tragedy, you would find that Nietzsche referred to Dionysus. And he referred to two things in the Greek culture, two gods and two qualities. One was Dionysus and one was Apollo. And when he talks about those gods in terms of qualities, right, he would speak of the Dionysian and the Apollonian. The Apollonian, let's start with that. Apollo, right, is the god of light, but Apollo is also here the god of order, right, of harmony, of individualism, and that's going to be very important, and of the rational. Right, so here we have a figure, right, and a force in Greek culture that focuses on those things, right, on the rational, right, on light, on the individual, and on order. Opposing Apollo and the Apollonian is Dionysus and the Dionysian impulse. And so when we think of Dionysus, we think of the god of disorder, right, of a kind of misrule almost. But we also, and this is why I said it's important to think of Apollo as associated with the individual, Dionysus is very, very much about group experience, and he's also about the irrational. So that opposition, right, that opposition between Dionysus and Apollo really reflects, it speaks to and it reflects an opposition that existed within ancient Greek culture itself. When you think of those two things, right, those two opposite things also compose together a totality. And those opposites, right, those opposites exist together. Excuse me, Loopy. Okay. So, and they're both important, right? And you can't really have a complete culture without both of those. Sorry, it's my little cat, and he's just had surgery. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what happens when we get involved with Dionysus. And I really hope that you read the materials on ritual, because the ancient Greek theater really does spring out, even the classical theater really springs out of the Dionysian rituals, and they were wild, right? They were wilder than anything I think we could imagine today. Even the wildest party today would look tame by Dionysus' standards. So what happens when Dionysus shows up in your city, right, or at your college? Hopefully not, right, or maybe you hope he does. In any case, when he shows up, strange things start to happen, and part of that strangeness involves a destabilizing of lots of things. And that's important because Dionysus himself is a god whose very identity is unstable. Right? And we see this in the play, right, in the tragedy, Euripides' tragedy, when he keeps turning into different things, right, appearing in the forms of different things. So he's a very unstable god, and he's also a god who's given to metamorphoses. Right? So there's always going to be this sense of transformation. Dionysus himself transforms easily, and things are transformed by his presence. He is known as the god of many joys, right? The giver of riches, the benefactor. He stills all cares, and he brings sleep and oblivion to daily life. But there's also a very dark side, right, associated with this god. Because this God, right, who brings about this fusion with a group, this forgetfulness, also brings about a loss of self. And what happens, right, when you bring the God inside you, and it's very important, right, that Dionysus is the god of wine, right? He's also the god of fertility. But anything that you're bringing inside of you, that you allow to take a kind of possession of you, right, is then going to also involve perhaps a loss of yourself. So that idea of Dionysus as a god, right, should also be accompanied by this sense of Dionysus as a god outside of us, right? We can see Dionysus walking about, but Dionysus is also a god who gets inside of us. And there's a very sort of physical, he's associated with a series of physical transformations that are really quite extraordinary. One of them, right, is, or two of them, and two of them I mentioned in the lectures, the sparagmos and the omophagia. These are fascinating and terrifying events. Right? The sparagmos is the tearing apart of limbs, and the omophagia is the consumption of the body, the eating of the flesh of the body. Anthropologists are fascinated by these rituals, and of course they're very hard to understand, right? But they are there someplace at work in this play and in the culture. Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to avoid the cat. A little bit more about the sparagmos and the omophagia. Now, generally what happened, right, and you know this already if you were reading about the rituals, the Dionysian rituals, is that the rituals ended in a sparagmos that usually involved an animal, right? So the sacrifice and pulling apart of the limbs of an animal, and the omophagia, right, the eating of that animal in symbolic ways. But you'll see, of course, that in Euripides' the Bacchae, that the symbolic nature, right, of the ritual is gone. And what happens, and what is very, very disturbing about Euripides' the Bacchae, is that these things have become literal. Right? The literal sparagmos is going to mean Pentheus is pulled apart. The omophagia, which doesn't happen, right, but almost happens, when Agave, right, Pentheus' mother, very nearly consumes the body of her own son. Something has happened, right? Something has gone terribly awry in the ritual. We cannot make literal things that are meant to be figurative. And when we do, right, something awful happens. The original Dionysian rituals were about fertility, right? They were the sparagmos, the omophagia. They were symbolic ways, right, of fusing with the earth and letting that earth then bring forth, come forth in a very fertile way. But in the Bacchae, right, there is no sense of fertility. Right? On the contrary, right, there's this end, right, end to everything, and perhaps to a culture, and the beginning of a real descent into away from the classical golden age and into the dark ages. Originally, Dionysus is a god of both creation and destruction, right? Or out of destruction, out of an act of destruction, comes a new era of creation. In the Bacchae, this is not quite so clear. So what happens, right? I think Euripides is really looking at what happens when the gods begin to leave. And what he means by that is what happens when we begin to leave the gods. Right? So it's not really, because obviously there aren't a bunch of gods wandering around ancient Greece, but the gods depart. And what makes a god depart? Gods depart, right, when they are no longer worshipped. And this is, of course, what's happening at the moment that Euripides is writing this play. Some of you mentioned in your responses, your blogs with last week, that you had read Oedipus Rex, and I'm so glad if you have, because Oedipus Rex by Sophocles, right, is a play that is really belongs to the apex, right, the high point of the classical Golden Age Greece. And yes, it's a horrifying tragedy and all that, but it's not anywhere near as horrifying as the Bacchae, because in a strange sense, right, in Oedipus, order is restored. Right? Something is revealed and order is restored. At the end of the Bacchae, it's not clear that anything has been restored, or that there's even a possibility of restoration. The mood has changed. We are at the end, right, not the height or even at the beginning. So with those things in mind, right, and also thinking again about how ecstasy sort of functions in this play, really look carefully at when the play is composed and what you think Euripides means by composing this play. So what is it about the historical and the cultural context of the play that are essential to its meaning? Think about the figures in this play, the primary figures. Dionysus is obviously one of them. Who is he in myth? Right? Who is he in this play? Why has he come to Asia Minor, right, to Greece? What sacrilege has been committed that makes him come? What principles does he embody? And once you get a real feeling for Dionysus, you can then turn to Pentheus, right, who is his kind of opposite, right? Pentheus is the being who opposes Dionysus and who will ultimately be opposed and killed as a result of his opposition to Dionysus. What principles does he embody? The word agon, right, is a word that means, in Greek, it means struggle. And this play is organized, right, around two key struggles, two key moments of agon. Right? Look for those moments. Think about the dynamics, right, or even the dialectics of those moments of struggle, and analyze them. Look too at, this is such a very, very classic element of tragedy. Look at how characters suffer a reversal of their fate. Right? What is Pentheus? Where is he at the beginning of the play? Where is he and what is he at the end of the play? And look at how the language begins to reflect this odd mirroring and yet opposition and yet fusion and yet opposition again of Pentheus and Dionysus. Think too about the roles of the women in this play, and particularly the role of Agave. She is a tragic figure, but not at all a tragic figure like the figure of Antigone in Sophocles' play. She's a very, very different figure. What makes Agave tragic here? And what is stunning and terrible about the last scene of this play? And what can we say is going to happen in the aftermath? It's a wonderful, wonderful play, and I hope you have the time and the patience to really read it carefully. And I said this last time, I think, but I just want to mention it again. When you are reading, don't skip over the choral odes. Right? Don't just go through them really quickly. Remember that the chorus is in many ways us. Right? They represent the audience. They represent the ordinary person watching this play. And listen to what they say. Enjoy it. And I very much look forward to your responses. And again, remember that I'm here. I want to help you with your projects as much as I can. And I'm looking forward to your responses this week. Take care.